To me, Global Reach Out is inspiring.
It's connecting with God, reaching out to the world, and impacting life.
The stories that shared is so personal and it deeply impacted me.
Global Reach Out to me is reach out to the truth.
Connecting hearts, connecting lives. You're listening to Global Reach Out.
Hi, I'm glad to be back again to address this subject, Bloom Where You Are Planted. And in this third episode, the title of my talk will be The Ordinary Made Holy. The Ordinary Made Holy. Throughout the Bible, we see God using ordinary people for His extraordinary mission. He chooses to make kings like David out of shepherds, call warriors like Gideon out of the least of the tribes, and choose leaders of His church like Peter from commoners. Even Mary, the mother of Jesus, was ordinary turned extraordinary. As Dr. Tan Suyin puts it, God's choice of Mary is instructive. She was young in a world that placed a high value on age. She didn't come from the palace, nor is it mentioned that she was a Levite. And she lived in Nazareth, not Jerusalem. By the valuations of this world, she was, ordinary. What made Mary extraordinary was her response to the assignment given to her. When told what she had to do, she replied, "I am the Lord's servant." Mary answered, "May your word to me be fulfilled." Luke chapter 1 verse 38. She was clear about her identity. She was a servant of the Lord, and she knew what that meant. An extraordinary God chooses the ordinary to do His extraordinary work. Unquote. The word ordinary can imply that something is insignificant. But when God's people place their life in His hands, they become impactful, despite being ordinary. As an extract from the poem "It All Depends on Whose Hands It Is" by missionary Paul Siniraj, it reads, "A rod in my hands will keep away a wild animal. A rod in Moses' hand will part the mighty sea. It depends whose hand it's in. A slingshot in my hands is a kid's toy. A slingshot in David's hand is a mighty weapon. It depends whose hands it's in. 5 loaves and 2 fishes in my hands are a couple of fish sandwiches. 5 loaves and 2 fishes in Jesus' hands will feed thousands. It depends whose hands it's in. As you see now, it depends on whose hands it's in." Unquote. In God's hands, the ordinary turns extraordinary. The ordinary can also mean the mundane. The seemingly mundane workplaces is one of the most important grounds for ministry. A conscious effort has to be made to ensure this is impressed on the church. God can use you and the roles you play, including your skills and gifts, to be His instruments in the workplace. God calls you to be faithful where you are planted, ordinary as you may be. As you allow God to use you, the ordinary is made extraordinary. Let me now turn to my point on how you can bloom where you are planted in the workplace. There was an incident narrated in Acts chapter 9, verse 1 to 22 that illustrates this truth. In Damascus, there was a disciple named Ananias. The Lord told him, "Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying." In a vision, he has seen a man named Ananias come and place his hands on him to restore his sight. "Lord," Ananias answered, "I have heard many reports about this man and all the harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And he has come here with authority from the chief priests to arrest all who call on your name. But the Lord said to Ananias, Go, this man is my chosen instrument to carry my name before the Gentiles and their kings, and before the people of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. Unquote. My focus here is not on Saul, but Ananias. The commission from the Lord to Ananias was to minister to Saul. But have you wondered why was it directed at Ananias? Plainly, it shows that God does not commission only those whom we deem to have prominence. He calls and uses ordinary people for His great purpose. Ananias was in the right place at the right time for God to use. This was despite being an ordinary person among the list of notables in the Bible. I'm sure if there was a funeral service for Ananias, Paul would have given a eulogy as a tribute to him. I can imagine Paul thanking Ananias for being willing to be used in the state he was in the place where he was in, despite the apprehensions he had, to minister to him. Ananias' reward is surely great in heaven. Similarly, we never know how God can use us to bring faith to someone who will be greatly used by Him in the future, even if we are not used in the same way. It is not how prepared we are or how others perceive us that matters most. What is more important is how we respond given the opportunity. Now consider the list of ordinaries that I'm going to mention right now and what they did. Johann van Stopitz was an ordinary clergyman who helped Martin Luther come to Christ. We are indeed indebted to Luther, the father of the Protestant Church. But don't forget, God used Stopitz for His purpose. Another example, John Eklund was an ordinary deacon who played a major part in the conversion of Charles Spurgeon. Now we know that Spurgeon became one of the greatest pastor preachers of the 19th century, and he is still revered today. But don't forget, without the ordinary deacon John Eklund, there may not be a Charles Spurgeon. A third example, Edward Kimball was an ordinary church member, a shoemaker, and Sunday school teacher. However, he was instrumental in providing spiritual mentorship to none other than D.L. Moody, one of the greatest evangelists of the 19th century. But without Edward Kimball, D.L. Moody may not rise to the occasion. Lastly, we have one called Mordecai Ham, an ordinary pastor and evangelist. But did you know that he preached on the night Billy Graham yielded his life to Christ? Well, the rest is history. The point is clear. We are to bloom in the place and circumstances where we are planted for the honor and glory of God. And this is regardless of our position or lack of credentials. Now, this came home to me in one of my own experience in an unlikely place, in the army. You see, in Singapore, every able-bodied man enters the army to serve his national service. After completion, we are expected to be called up for reservist training for about 2 to 4 weeks each year. I did not have to do reservist training for 6 years due to my overseas studies. But when I finally entered my first reservist camp, I revolted and complained. I was dismayed at the great mismatch between myself and others in that logistic camp I was assigned to. Most of them were dialect speaking and poorly educated. Some had criminal records. There were several gangs within the camp. We had a bunch of the worst disciplined people in the vocation as cooks, drivers, and storemen at that time. Undoubtedly, there was fear in me. There was a level of discomfort in me. there was prejudice in me. It was like being offered unclean food by the Lord, just as the Apostle Peter experienced. But God had to deal with all these apprehensions and prejudices to move me from sulking and fretting to see the great opportunity I had. I thank God in the course of mixing with all these reservist mates, He gave me the privilege of sharing Christ with a number of them. This was done despite difficulty communicating in their dialects. But seeds were planted because these were divine moments. I could never have imagined that some 10 years later, one of them would accept the Lord. He grew in faith and passion. He responded to the call to full-time pastoral ministry and went for theological studies. Do you know that he is now a pastor serving in the Mandarin service in my church and in grassroots ministry? My experience taught me that we can indeed bloom where we are planted, no matter how inadequate we may feel. Well, the question, are you blooming where you are planted? Next, I would like to highlight to you that the workplace can be a holy ground for God. You see, Moses, when he encountered God at the burning bush, was told to take off his shoes, for the place where he stood was holy ground. He was at that time a shepherd in a remote desert place, a very ordinary person. Yet God visited him in his ordinary occupation and marked the place as holy. As Ruth H. Barton said, all of us can have burning bushes in our lives, places that shimmer with grace, alerting us to the possibility that God is at work, doing something that we could not have predicted, unquote. Have you considered your ordinary workplace as holy ground? Do you realize that it's a place where God should be honored in your going out and coming in? This thought came to me at one time when I worked in the workplace. Whenever I could make it to my office for a time of personal prayer and devotion, I literally took off my shoes to pray. It was a sign that the office where I would have interactions with colleagues was holy ground. I pray for God to make me conscious of my testimony. I pray that the words of my mouth will be seasoned with salt, and the meditation of my heart will be acceptable to Him. I could invoke God's blessing in every meeting I went to, in the production spaces I work in, and in every decision I had to make. When we regard our workplace as holy ground, this cannot help but change us and the ways we interact with our work and our colleagues. Now let me summarize. An ordinary person is made holy in 3 ways. Firstly, when the ordinary performs the extraordinary as he surrenders to the will and calling of God. Secondly, when the ordinary blooms in the place where he has been planted for the honor and glory of God. Thirdly, when the ordinary regards the workplace as holy ground, fully consecrated to God. I hope you will say amen to that. Well, it's time to end again. In my next episode, I will touch on how workplace can be a mission field. Till then, have a blessed week. Thank you.
The program is proudly presented by Global Reach Out. We welcome you to share our live enriching webcasts with family and friends through our website, global-reachout.org. Let's reach out to bless more lives together.